Welcome, everybody. Thanks for sticking around till 3 o'clock, late in the afternoon. I guess it's not too late. It's mid-afternoon, I should say. But at any rate, thanks for sticking around for this. Um, as Owen said, uh, my name is Scott Lynch. I've been a Bucks instructor probably going back to 2006. Previous to that, I was a student at Bucks County Community College and kind of started my world out in network engineering as a Cisco CCNA. Which is a course that I actually teach as well up in Newtown. But for the most part, the last I'd say 15 years of my life has pretty much been focused on security. My day job, I am the network security operations manager for a global aerospace company and satellite communication system, which is headquartered out of Stockholm, Sweden. And as Owen had pointed out, I teach various network security courses for Bucks, as well as the SIM course for the SANS Institute for the last 3 years. Other than that, this is kind of an about me slide, just kind of giving you a background. I started out in the military and kind of worked my way up into IT. And the rest is history, so to speak. So what we're going to kind of talk about tonight or today, I keep saying tonight because I feel like I'm working a night schedule now, is network security monitoring, and specifically how we can apply the technique or the concepts to, your home network. One of the things I always get asked by students that are trying to break into security is, how can I get the practical practice, if you will, the hands-on experience for the stuff that I'm going to do as an employee in a company to show employers that I have the knowledge required to not only do the job but also to learn, right? So network security monitoring, as defined by Chris Sanders, who's the author of the Applied Network Security Monitoring course book. NSM is the collection and detection and analysis of network security data. And there's many different definitions of network security monitoring out there, but predominantly the idea here is we're looking at how can we collect information on a network, specifically at the network level. This isn't so much aimed at looking at event logs or syslog coming off of Linux devices, but specifically packetized data, which everybody has. If you have a network at home, you have a network in the office, they're all Ethernet or wireless based networks that are flowing packets in and out of a firewall or a default gateway device. And therefore, there's a possibility for you to collect data off that network. So why would we need to do, or why do we need network security monitoring? It's a great question. The question I would ask you folks in this class, or this lecture, I should say, or down the road to think about, do you currently do network security monitoring? What is your definition in your organization? And if you're not working today, how can we do this in your home, right? Because it's a great place to start. If we can start to learn the principles and the concepts behind collecting data, analyzing data in our home network, where it's, the comfort of your own kingdom, if you will, then you can't do anything but improve, honestly. So realistically, what we're trying to do here is with network security monitoring, we're trying to catch things like malware, spyware, ransomware. There's been a lot of talks today about ransomware. We just did an actual conference on this a couple weeks back, or maybe it was a month ago now. I'm losing track of time. But in order to see what's going on in your network, in order to identify these threats before they become a full-blown ransomware event, we need a way to collect the data. And this is probably one of the best ways, in my mind, to see threats as they're potentially occurring, and have the ability for you to basically respond to them. That's the whole point, detection and response, right? So with that being said, let's talk about that for a little bit. So we need to be able to add visibility in some form of awareness, if you will, whether it's in the form of alerting, some system generating an alert based on network traffic that was collected, so that we can, understand, are we under attack? Is there something on our network? Because believe it or not, ransomware, malware, attackers, they're not just going to go after corporate environments. In a lot of cases, they do, obviously because it's a financial gain for them to do that. Sometimes it could be, in the form of an advanced persistent threat, if you will, or the APT term you hear a lot. It could be a nation state attacker, but most of the time it's financially driven. And so you'll see a lot of different cases that could be, happen in your home environment. So, taking network data in, producing a tool that you can, or using a tool that you can basically use to analyze all that so that you can do threat hunting, you can do metadata extraction of packets, analyze network traffic as it's coming through. And then on top of that, add in enrichment of, GeoIP lookup to see, okay, I have an IP address in a log. I don't know where it is in the world. Can I do a geographic lookup to figure out, is it something in the US? Is it something overseas? Is it something in a threat area that it's a known bad IP address, as an example? And then we can also throw things like threat intel in here. A lot of people make fun of threat intel feeds. They get a kind of a bum rap, and predominantly because with threat intel, in my previous life in the military, I worked in intelligence, predominantly in electronic warfare and signals intelligence. The problem is when you start to get tons and tons of data, you have a tendency to get a slightly skewed picture of what you think the intelligence of an area might be. So when it comes to threats, it's one thing to have, a couple reports that explain what they think the threat is. Maybe it's a malware from some crime syndicate down in South America or whatever. But the more and more reports that get generated, you would assume that the fidelity would get better. But in a lot of cases, you might actually see conflicting information, which then causes confusion. So a lot of times this is where threat intel feeds can get a little wonky, if you kind of want to put it that way. And some people find it not to add a lot of value. And this is specifically aimed at a lot of your free and open source threat intel feeds that exist out there. There are commercial as well as government provided threat intel feeds that exist. Those should have better fidelity because they have analysts tied to keyboards actually doing that work. But again, we're doing this from home. We're trying to keep the perspective of, you're a home user, you want to see what's going on in your network, and we want to figure out what's happening. The other thing too is to keep in mind that, when I look at this from an enterprise perspective, one of the biggest things that we run into is most folks don't know what's on their network. And even at home, you would think, I know what I have. I have a computer, I have 10 computers. If you have children, there's a good chance, especially with COVID lockdown in the last couple of years, I'm going to guess most of your children have a laptop computer that was given to them by the school district. So you may have multitudes of additional compute platforms on your home network, phones, right? Smartphones, all kinds of things can produce additional traffic. So getting an inventory, if you will, it's one of the things that we look at when we're looking at this at a corporate level. I think I heard one of the speakers early on talk about the CIS, or the Center for Information Internet Security, the benchmarks, if you will. What used to be the CIS top 20 or the SANS top 20, which is now the CIS top 18. The first two, if you will, top, security things to do, inventory of hardware, inventory of software on your network. And the predominant reason for that is if you don't know what's on your network and you don't know what software is there or hardware is there, it's really hard to identify threats that you don't know about, right? So first, find out what you have on your network, seek to understand what your network looks like. As some of my folks that I know in this field would say, know thyself. And then from there, learn about your network and the traffic as it flows across it. So like I said, typical home network, it could be a lot of different things. And, excuse my icons here, they're a bit wonky, but this is what was built into PowerPoint, so I took advantage of it. Each one of these is, sort of to kind of indicate, if I put on the laser pointer here, we've got things like movies, game systems, laptops, I don't know, desktop computers, IoT home devices, streaming media services or speakers, cameras. It could be in the form of everything from a Ring camera, right, for your doorbell, to cameras running inside your household. I got a blender here, and I get a kick out of this one because there are actually network enabled appliances that you could potentially run across in your network that you're not fully aware that I'm assuming if you bought a blender with a network connection, you're probably using it. Although I don't know of a blender right now off the top of my head that is network enabled. But refrigerators, for example, is something that you hear about quite a bit. So the bottom line, a lot of different devices. The car is my favorite one here. Because for some folks that actually have like connected devices, like if you have Uconnect devices, for example, for like Jeep or Dodge, and that family of vehicles, they actually can leverage your home Wi-Fi in some cases. I've also seen the same thing with I think Hyundai can also do this as well. So in other words, if you pull your car to the driveway and it detects your wireless access point and connects, it can do updates. So now you've got your vehicle on your home wireless network. And so this all generates traffic and potential targets for a threat attacker to either attack or to exploit additional data to do open source intelligence collection, or basically just try to figure out who you are. Not every attack is going to be, again, a nation state attacker. It may not even be financially driven. It could be your neighbor next door just screwing around on the computer. I've seen cases of people learning to become hackers. So what do? They decide to try to hack their neighbors' networks because they're open or they're potentially open for them to attack. You can never tell these days. So it's always best to be prepared. So the tool I'm going to talk about here is predominantly the tool that I've used for the last, I don't know, since 2014, basically, Security Onion. Now, this is a tool that, if you look at the definition here, free and open Linux distribution for threat hunting, enterprise security monitoring, and log management. This is what I would almost call like a Swiss Army knife, if you will, of network security monitoring tools. It leverages quite a bit of product under the hood. This is freely available to you. You can download this today off Security Onion Solutions website. It includes a lot of different technologies and tooling, some of which we're not going to have time to talk about today because there's not enough time to do that. But things like the Hive, if you're doing case management, Playbook, which is kind of Security Onion's sort of, I guess, threat automation toolkit, if you will, for building playbooks for actually doing threat hunts, automated threat hunts, if you will. OS Query, CyberChef, which we will actually look at, which is sort of like a Swiss Army knife for doing data parsing. Elasticsearch, which is pretty much the back end side of Security Onion. Used to use a thing called ELSA. It's now moved to Elasticsearch, or what we used to call an ELK stack, which was Elastic, Logstash, and Kibana. Kibana being the GUI in this case, Logstash being the actual log parsing, or log broker, I should say, for logs coming into your system. And then Suricata. Suricata is an open source intrusion detection system that you can download for free. Snort is Cisco Talos's version. It's been around for a long time. But Suricata and Snort are pretty much the two tools that used to be the predominant open source IDSs that you could leverage. Right now, they're leveraging Suricata because it has some beneficial features for Security Onion in general, but the way that it uses CPU cores and memory and whatnot. Snort, at some point, as I understand it, will be brought back into the Security Onion product as an option. But right now, this is where we're at. The big thing, the tool that I love in this set is Zeek. Zeek used to be called Bro, which is a network security monitoring packet extraction tool, if you will. Think of it like Wireshark without actually having to have a GUI to interface with it. Basically, you point network data at your Security Onion sensor. It gets ingested. Zeek processes all of the traffic coming in. It parses it into folders and files, and it does this until you turn it off. And you can pull all kinds of interesting data off the wire. And then, of course, we've got other things like Wazoo, which is being used to manage. And it's been a while since I've looked at this one. I'm trying to remember. I believe Wazoo you usually use to manage endpoints if you're trying to do things like host-based IDS, which is different than network-based intrusion detection. Host-based is like if somebody's attacking my computer, will it set off an alert and then it give me some information about that attacker? So on the screen here, you can see basically just a little bit of an architecture of a Security Onion solution where an adversary is coming in from the internet trying to bang through your firewall. In most cases, most attackers today honestly won't come at you through the firewall unless there's an opening in that firewall that would allow unsolicited traffic to come in automatically. In a lot of cases, most firewalls allow, for example, SMTP port 25 for email, and possibly port 8443, depending on if you're hosting web servers or types of solutions like that in your internal network or possibly in your DMZ. So any opening there is a possible exploit point for somebody to use a tool against you. 9 times out of 10, most attackers are going to try to leverage email. This is where we get our phishing attacks, our phishing scams, if you will. And if that doesn't work, the other option is social engineering, right? Somebody could actually call you up or take advantage of you calling them. I actually had a situation once where I had a family member who had a computer problem. I was out of town at the time because IT guys and gals, we ended up being the de facto help desk for family. which I don't mind. But in this particular example, they called a number that they, Googled for, like, I don't know, HP tech support or something. And of course, it was one of those ads that shows up in Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine it was that they were using, and called the number. And of course, the person on the other end acted like they were HP or Microsoft, and then immediately tried to connect back to the computer and, install software and try to analyze the problem. What we found out later was basically it was a scam group, if you will, that basically once you know, get them connected to your computer, they run a batch script that basically makes it look like you have a bunch of infections on your system. I think the example I heard was, the Chinese, the Russians, everybody bad is hacking you. And they basically have a batch script that runs on your computer that echoes out to a command window on your screen. And it looks like you're attacked when in fact it's really just like opening a Word document. The problem is in those cases, there are the possibilities for them to infect your machine because you basically let somebody into your house. So it can be troublesome. Malware defense products that you might have on your computer, whether it's Windows Defender or some other, commercial product, can help try to mitigate some of that. But again, we won't really know until we actually monitor the network to see if anything's actually coming in or out of your system that you did not expect. Now, the problem with most people doing this on their home network is there's a bit of a, what would you call this? A lack of knowledge, in a better term. There's a good possibility that you may not understand all that you need to understand in order to interpret the data you're about to see. Here in a couple slides, we're actually going to do a demo. I'm going to tempt the demo gods by actually doing a live walkthrough for a couple minutes. And you'll see that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be tweaked, tuned, and cleaned up. The best advice I can give to anybody that's doing this, if you're doing this for the first time and you want to learn, follow along with what we're doing in here, and then take advantage of the links that I've added to the back of the slide deck. I believe Owen is going to provide these at a later date up on the website, so you'll be able to download the PDF and get the links out and do what you want. But for the most part, learning how to interpret the data we're about to look at and to not fear what you're seeing. In other words, just because there's a bunch of alerts in this system doesn't mean it's the end of the world. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some things here. So some of the benefits of using a tool like Security Onion, and there are other NSM tools out there. Another one that comes to mind is Rock NSM as another example. But predominantly network security monitoring tools actually do tap into the actual network traffic on your network, and then they pull those packets in, they parse that data, and then they do something with it. They analyze it, they build alerts, whatever it might be. If you're looking at traditional logging solutions, like what a security incident and event management platform or a SIM might do, generally speaking, SIMs, you generally point logs off of endpoints like your servers, your laptops, your access points, your firewall switches, etc. Could be syslog, Windows event logs, doesn't really matter what it is, but that is not packet capture. That is basically typical log data that's produced on an endpoint once something's occurred. So this is the other side of the coin, if you will. I have a strong feeling in this field, obviously being a network engineer, and I also teach SIM and tactics for this kind of stuff, that the way to get to the best of everything is to have Windows event logs, your Linux logs, your Cisco logs, your Palo logs, whatever your products are, as well as your network security monitoring data. If you have all that, you have a fully produced kind of security operations solution. You can pretty much reasonably say you should be able to detect most attacks as they're starting on your network, as they're occurring, at what stage an attacker might be in, and how you can try to limit their access and shut them off. Because the name of the game at the end of the day is to identify the threat and mitigate it, period, right? Get it off the network. Forensics, incident response, that's a secondary task that comes after we've mitigated a threat. But predominantly our job is to detect and defend as a blue teamer. So you can see here in this slide, the benefits of Security Onion are obvious. I've talked about full packet capture. Something I haven't talked about is the idea of collecting NetFlow data. NetFlow, in a lot of cases, like a Cisco proprietary protocol that allows us to collect flow data, which is basically, if my computer is talking to Google and I want to know how much bandwidth I'm consuming on a network at any given time, NetFlow can give me that information. It uses a thing called a 7-tuple, which is basically a marriage of the source and destination IP port protocol, the Ethernet type, and then some metadata about the actual flow of information so that we can try to identify what this connection might be for. In a lot of cases, net flow collectors in the past used to be something that you paid for. There still are commercial solutions. I personally used one by Plixer, which is called Scrutinizer, which is a great product. It's actually pretty reasonably priced, honestly. So if you're looking for commercial solutions, there's solutions out there. Suricata can actually produce net flow data for you because you're passing network data through the sensor. The IDS sensor can actually pull and extrapolate and actually make net flow data for us to take advantage of. So it's a quick win. And obviously intrusion detection is the other feature of Suricata itself. But benefits of security in. If you run this at home, not only can you run your network data into it and get identify bandwidth hogs, for example. Like if you want to call out your kids for sucking up all the bandwidth on your home network, you could definitely do it with this potentially. You can also pull in Windows event logs. So if you have a Windows laptop or desktops, you can actually configure them to actually ship those logs that are part of the Windows event logging system to this tool. You can also export anything that has syslog turned on. So a lot of cases like printers will usually support syslog. Routers will. Your home wireless access points may vary depending on the product you're running, but you could also ship those logs if you wanted to and centralize, if you will, and almost make this into a SIM. I call it a poor man's SIM just because it's at that point you're trying to do a lot. SIM is built to be a SIM, NSM is built to be an NSM. I think it's kind of a marriage of two products. But for the home use, it's a great idea to kind of get your feet wet and understand how all these things work together. On top of that, we can add in things like threat intel, where we can actually, basically Zeek has a threat intel module that will go out and actually connect to threat intel feeds, pull in information, and as it sees IP addresses in your network or DNS names, it can actually add additional information to that log when you're looking at it to say, hey, not only is that IP Microsoft or Google or someplace in Russia, but it's also tied to some crime syndicate you might want to investigate. That's information that you wouldn't normally get from just simply seeing the source and destination traffic. So definitely kind of a handy thing. On the bottom here is a table. This is just kind of a table that I sort of stole out of our SANS presentation, but basically these are all the different logs that we can generate. Zeek will carve out everything from network connection, so source destination, IP and port and protocol. We can see all of the devices on your network that are doing dynamic host configuration protocol for DHCP, basically anything that's getting an IP address. This can be super helpful for your home network because in a lot of cases, if you're trying to find out who's on your network, they're going to need an IP address to talk. Everything needs an IP address to talk and get out to the internet and go through your firewall. So it's a great way to kind of identify devices that you may or may not have even realized are there. Because surprisingly, if you have like streaming media devices, smart TVs is another example, even stereo receivers, anything with a network connection could potentially be pulling traffic down off your network. Things like FTP traffic, which may not be so applicable in your home network, but if you know that you don't use FTP and nothing you have on your network is using FTP and you see FTP traffic, you might want to investigate stuff like that. We can also see remote desktop sessions. This is a good one if you're trying to hunt for people that are trying to remote into computers on your network. Again, if you're not remoting into anything, because generally speaking, I don't do this at home unless I'm doing it in my lab environment. So that's something you could actually look for. So these again are just examples of things you can do. Another one that's really interesting is SMTP. This one can actually let you see all inbound email, unencrypted, meaning clear text that you can read. And the way that it does this is, generally speaking, when SMTP traffic or Microsoft Exchange is shipping email out to the world, it generally sends it out on, like I said, TCP port 25, and it's unencrypted. Unless you specify encryption, then you've done end-to-end encryption between your email server and some other device, whether it might be a cloud spam filter system like Barracuda, or if you're doing Microsoft 365, then there's a good chance nobody's going to be able to sniff email from your home or your office environment. But if you're running Exchange on-prem, this is, again, not your home necessarily, unless you happen to be running SendMail or something at home because you're being really creative with your lab. You could actually read people's email, which is kind of crazy. Which leads me to another point that I didn't put on the slide, and I should have. When you put a device like this on your network, you're basically introducing what we call wiretap, right? I'm not fully up to speed as of late on wiretap laws, but I'm pretty sure wiretap is illegal unless you're mandated to do it. As an example, most federal employees are not allowed to do this without a warrant, right? So if that's the case and you're planning to do this at home, just understand that you are wiretapping your home. The other thing to keep in mind too is because you're wiretapping your home, there's also the possibility an attacker could take advantage of the fact that you've already set up a network monitoring solution for them to log into and take a look at what's going on. So try to use passwords that are not easy, like password. Because we don't want to give up the tool that we're monitoring the network with to an attacker potentially. But again, wiretap is a big thing. This can be used for good and evil. So just be aware of that and understand that if you do this at work and you're not authorized to do that, you could be putting yourself in a situation to be sued or potentially terminated. I've seen this kind of go a bunch of different ways. All right. That being said, and I think, Owen, we had said that there is chat available. If people have questions, obviously you're keeping them towards the end of the conversation here, but I usually try to say if you have questions you're thinking of, preload them into the chat window so we can talk about them at the end. Might be helpful, just so that everybody doesn't forget what they were thinking about when they thought about it. All right, that being said, let's talk about the typical home network components. So I took a quick screenshot off Google of a Verizon Fios router and a Comcast, typical coax Mocha modem that you have your cable plugged into. Most of these devices have a little 4-port Ethernet switch on the back, so you'll see they've got little switch port too you can plug Ethernet into. Some of you may be taking advantage of these, some of you may not be. Again, if we're looking at this from the home network perspective, most folks are probably leveraging wireless. Now, these devices are generally multifunction firewall default gateway kind of devices for your network. In other words, you plug them in, you connect the ISP's network connection to a port, whether it be fiber, Ethernet, coax, whatever it is. Turn on the Wi-Fi. Now all your devices that are wireless can see that, connect to it, and you're off to the races. There's a lot of stuff going on under the hood. Maybe some of you never log in. Maybe some of you do. Understand that we have network address translation firewall functionality. So it basically means the outside IP, which is known to the world, is only known by what your whole network is known by one address, whereas your internal network could be upwards of 50 or 100 IPs, depending on what you're doing. It does route traffic between multiple networks. It can act as a wireless access point, not always. Sometimes they're not wireless. Sometimes it's just turned off. Obviously, the Ethernet switch, I just talked about that. This also provides IP addressing to your network, so it acts like a DHCP server. DHCP servers, for the most part, are designed to issue out IP addresses to devices that request them so that you can communicate on the network that you're on. And predominantly, the duty as well here is it is a security device, so it is supposed to protect your home network. But it is kind of interesting that we spend thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on enterprise firewalls in offices, and then we protect our network at home with a $50 box from a vendor. Let that sink in for a minute. Part of the reason why I'm suggesting you do something like network security monitoring at home is so that you can actually identify threats on your home before they turn south on you. Because just like we push on ransomware on the enterprise, backups, you should have a backup of your systems at home, a backup of all your photo libraries, preferably not connected to the network so that an attacker can take those over and encrypt them. This is a whole talk for another day, but the point is you are protecting your network with a reasonably cheap device. So there are ways we can improve upon that, but we'll deal with that later once we get to monitoring. So in order to get started with monitoring, we need some way of tapping into the network connection. So I propose using something as simple as a small little network switch, which you can buy. I mean, Netgear is not the only vendor out there that does this. It's just I just looked at Amazon this morning, and you can buy the Netgear GS108 for $35. It's cheap. It's not meant to be a security device. It's solely there for the purpose of connecting your internet connection from your router, your wireless router that you have today, just like I showed you on the last page, in between that to your home network and your ISP equipment. And then this little port on the other end becomes a monitor port. In this case, this is obviously not an 8-port. This is a 5-port switch, but you get the idea representatively. And what you do is you actually log into the web interface for that switch, because believe it or not, there's an IP address for it. You can go in and you manage it. And you actually tell it to take all the traffic off of one of these ports and simply copy packet for packet to another port. We call this port mirroring. Cisco World calls it a span port. The bottom line is we're simply trying to replicate data between these two ports into a security monitoring device. We do the same thing at the enterprise level. So for example, instead of using this, I might use a Gigamon, 40, 50, $100,000 network tap at a data center level. And there's other products as well for that. But for the most part, this is a $35 tap. I actually have one right here. Easy. Keep a bunch of these around, maybe a couple of them at least. Keep them in a go bag if you ever have to do incident response. Can be handy for doing this kind of stuff. So as an example here, I'm showing you that same picture of all the devices in your house before. They just all connected wirelessly to your access point. And then from there, it connected either via fiber or Ethernet or coax, whatever the provider gives you, to the internet. What we're suggesting here in order to make this work effectively is that you install that switch behind your access point, and then you hang another wireless access point behind it on that switch. A couple of reasons for doing this. One, if this is wireless and your devices connect to it, you're never going to see it come across this switch port. We're not going to be able to monitor all of your traffic. So we need some way to get in between the traffic. And the best way to do that is to actually disable wireless on this guy, plug in a switch behind it, and then hang another wireless access point and have everybody connect to this. Now all traffic going to this wireless will actually go through this switch, which is then being mirrored over to your new handy dandy network security monitoring tool, which I've labeled here as could be a laptop, could be a desktop, could be a Nook from Intel, it could be a Raspberry Pi. There's a lot of options here. You can choose your own adventure for how you want to deploy these tools. We'll talk about that here for a couple minutes, but just understand that there's a bunch of different ways. You don't have to have a $100,000 network lab at home to run these things. You could use a cheap old laptop if you had one laying around, for the most part. In fact, I guess I should say this. If you want to take a full advantage of Security Onion and all the features that I'm going to show you in a minute, you need a minimum of 16 gig of RAM, 200 gig of hard drive space, and I want to say maybe 4 cores of CPU core, something like that. The specs are on their website, but for the most part, 16 gig of RAM, which is a lot for an old laptop. So you may actually end up having to build something, but there's other ways around this, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, monitoring hardware. Here's the Netgear GS108. You can look those up and you can find them. There's other tools out there. Take a look what you want. I've got some links to some people that I follow and that I know from the SANS community and the security community at large. Black Hills Information Security is one of them that comes to mind. They actually did a great home lab walkthrough where they actually talk about using a thing called a router board, which is basically a Wi-Fi enabled Ethernet switch router combination, which is a bit more on crack, if you will, because it's a lot more stuff going on than just this guy here. Costs a little bit more, maybe in the 190 range, maybe a little bit less, depending on which one you get. But that's the lab that they walk through, which is a very similar talk to this one. So you might want to check that out. You could buy an Intel Nook. When I looked this one up for the picture, it was about 300, 400 bucks. Another idea is you could actually use a Mac Mini, which has got a, potentially if you've got 16 gig of RAM, one of those, you can take advantage of that. You just got to get creative. If it ends up being that you don't have a huge budget, there is an option of going to a Raspberry Pi. This will not necessarily run Security Onion, but you can run the guts of it by running Zeek as a separate sensor. The company that makes Zeek is a company called Corelight. They actually have a Raspberry Pi image that you can download. I want to say it's Corelight at Home, if I remember right. We'll talk about it here in a couple slides, but you can take advantage of that and use it to in place of something like Security Onion, even though it'd be nice to have all the features of Security Onion. Zeek gives you a lot of that data as well. All right, so I built a lab environment here in a virtual machine running on a laptop. And the reason I did this is the more I thought about it, the more I probably didn't want to give a live demo on my home network of all my traffic with my kids and my wife. And I thought that would probably be really bad OPSEC on my part. So in order to emulate an environment, I basically built a lab with multiple virtual machines. If you're not familiar with virtual machines, just kind of flow with me here. They're basically virtually emulated software-based hardware that we're running inside of a laptop. In this case, I've got a Windows 10 image, Windows 7, because everybody's still got Windows 7 out there, right? I've got a Windows XP image. I just didn't feel like going that far back in time. I've got Kali actually emulating an attacker. You could use any Linux pen testing tool set that's out there, but Kali's the easy one, right? I have a virtual switch, which is set up for these guys to talk through. I even spun up a virtual firewall, which is based on pfSense. It's an open source product. You can run at home. If you want to beef up your security, this is definitely one way to do it. If you want to make sure that your ISP's router is doing its job, put a pfSense behind it, and you'll be surprised what else you can see. And I just want to caveat this. I'm not telling you your ISP is weak and your people are breaking into your network because of it. I'm just saying it doesn't hurt to, upgrade the locks, right, on your house. So in this case, I've got an actual sniffing interface, which is basically what we call the process of actually capturing packets off of a network. Sniffing, promiscuous wiretap, whatever you want to call it, port mirroring, spanning. That data is going to be fed into a virtual security onion sensor, which is then connected out to my internal network here at home for me to manage it. It looks like a bunch of more moving parts. It doesn't have to be that complicated for you. What you're looking to do at home is this, right? Physical switch behind your access point, turn off the wireless here, hang another $50 access point behind that switch. You're back in business, everything's happy. You plug a laptop or some type of computer into here and you set up a span port and you're off to the races. This is an acceptable solution. The one I'm showing you here in my lab environment is my way of faking out that design without giving away my home IP addresses and usernames and DNS names and, all the important stuff, right? So that being said, let's kind of walk through a quick demo. And let me minimize this here for a second. So find my slides, my interface here. So what I've done is basically, like I said, I've installed Security Onion. And if you want to see what the lab environment looks like, basically, I'm just going to log into my VMware environment. Right now, I have 9 virtual machines. Some of these I'm using, some of them are not. This is sort of my disposable lab environment I run on a laptop. If you're interested in VMware training and this kind of stuff, we obviously offer VMware training. I'm sure Owen has probably mentioned this earlier, but we kind of walk through this exact same kind of design in our classes. But for the most part, I've got Windows 7, like I said, a firewall, Security Onion, Windows 10, and a Kali box running. So I'm going to log into that Security Onion box, and let's see what we get. So just so you know, this is the latest and greatest version 2.3. It just came out literally Friday, Saturday. Security Onion had their conference, and they actually just released this during the conference. So if you go over to YouTube, which this link is in the portal or in the PowerPoint deck, the Security Onion conference for 2021, every conference they've had, I think going back to 2018, I was actually there for that one, but maybe even further back. They've got videos for them all. So definitely check this out. If you're into this kind of stuff and you like doing threat hunting and the idea of doing threat detection and detection engineering, there's a lot of great stuff in here. There's great talks in the 2021 talk that I'm still kind of rolling through, but you could definitely take a look at those. So this is the latest and greatest version. I think it's 2.3.8, if I recall. Basically, on the left-hand side, you can see there's all these different tabs. I'm going to go into the alert tab real quick. And this is just alerts based on the intrusion detection engine, Suricata, if you recall, that is running on this sensor. Traffic is flowing through it. It is collecting the traffic. It's analyzing and it's saying, this looks suspicious. This is all based on what we call the emerging threat signature base, which is free. It's basically think of it as antivirus signatures that you don't have to pay money for, that you download on a regular basis, getting fed into this system. So if a new attack type, technique, whatever it might be, it'll be updated and you'll see it coming through. If you look at this, I've got a bunch of different hits. Some of them are yellow, some of them are orange, some of them are red. Some of them it's just 1 or 2 hits. Some of them it's a very high number. This is a generically clean installed version of Security Onion. I've done absolutely no tweaking, tuning, nothing. There's going to be some false positives in here because there always is. If anybody here is a firewall manager, you deal with intrusion detection, you have to tune it. You can't just let it sit there. But there's also a lot of stuff that's probably legitimate, and it's legitimate because I actually went and ran scans from that Kali box against those 2 Windows boxes on the network, and this sensor picked those up. So a couple things about the interface. This is the Security Onion main interface. There's a hunt tab. You can actually look at full packet captures because it's saving the data to the hard drive. I can manage a grid or a group of sensors if I had them distributed across my home. Unlikely, but if you were in the enterprise, you might have distributed sensors all over the globe. The guy I work with, who's my mentor at SANS, he had the world's largest Zeek network at one point. I want to say 1,000 plus sensors. I could even be wrong on that number. It was big. The point is you can manage a bunch of stuff from this one central console. And then in the download section, this actually allows you to install your agents that you might want to use for additional endpoint monitoring. But big thing here on the tool side, we have an interface to Kibana, which allows us to actually look at the data raw inside of Elastic. We have Grafana if we want to look at the specs of the monitor, the security onion sensor itself for CPU, memory load, disk interface statistics, how much IO, I mean, you name it, there's all kinds of stuff going on in here. We have Cyber Chef, which again, like I said, this is the kind of a Swiss Army knife for processing data and pulling it apart. This was developed by GCHQ, which is the, I guess I would say was the equivalent or is the cyber interface for the UK government, if I'm not mistaken. I'm totally thrashing this right now, so I'll probably hear about it later on Twitter. But you can do a lot of great stuff with this, and we'll come back to that. If you go back to the security onion talks, sorry, my allergies are killing me right now. If you scroll down to the bottom, the state of the onion, this is Doug Burks and his team that developed the product. They've been just chugging along in this for years. Again, this is a free tool to be used in the community. They also offer training and hardware appliances if you want to use them. They actually talk about doing analysis using Cyber Chef. Definitely worth taking a look at and seeing what coolness you can do there. So anyway, we've also got things like the playbook interface I told you about for automating searches and queries, hunting, if you will, inside your system. The Hive is a ticket management system, case management, which that deserves its own talk. And then the attack navigator for MITRE. But right now for home use, we're not going to go down those paths. What I'm going to do is go back to alerts here. We're going to take a quick look. So if you click on any one of these, if I just click on, for example, one here that I know will give us something interesting. If I click on this one for Nmap OS detection probe, I can actually filter to say only include this. I can exclude this from my alert, so I'm not clobbered by looking at a bunch of data here. I can drill into this. I can copy things to my clipboard, and I can also do other actions like, for example, I can do an actual hunt and try to see if I can query and correlate additional information around that particular alert. I can kick it out to Cyber Chef if I wanted to. For example, if I click this button, it'll pivot out and open up in another window that alert. Now, if you notice, it's just text. Doesn't do me any good, right? But it's just an example of what you can do here. So I'm going to pivot back to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here. You can also see we can Google, and I can go to Virus Total. So for example, if I wanted to upload something to Virus Total, even though I don't have an API key, it will actually try to look it up. And you can do that for free for the most part. All right, so back to the point. So what I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to drill down. What this is going to do is it's going to focus in on that particular capture of traffic. And it's going to basically, for the most part, show me the beginning of the communication and the end of it. And if I really want to dig down, I can actually look at the packets that were captured doing this. Again, this is something you have to learn over time. And I keep looking at the clock because I realize I'm talking a lot and I'm running out of time here. But if you look at these, you can actually drill in even more. And you can also hit the little carrots here and you can actually look at every individual field that was collected and parsed out. So for example, I can see there was a message that was extracted. In this case, it was the message from the actual emerging threat signature that fired, telling us there was some weird thing going on. But what else is it? What else can I do with this? Well, if I wanted to, I could try to go and actually look at a packet capture for this. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And you can see, if you look at this hex-wise, a bunch of C's. What the heck is this? I don't even understand what that is. For the most part, don't feel bad if this doesn't make sense. Most people don't understand what this is saying. This is basically a dissection. If I was looking at this in Wireshark, which I'm going to do right now, if you hit this button, it pops it open. I can actually look at these packets in an installed version of Wireshark on my computer. And you can see the source IP talking to the destination, which in my case happens to be my default gateway, my firewall. It's a UDP protocol. And I can see the source and destination port. I don't know those ports off the top of my head. It's probably some kind of pseudo randomly generated thing. If I go into the IP, I can actually follow the UDP stream, and there's all those C's again that we saw in the hex editor. So definitely something weird. Don't know what it is. What you would actually find out later is when I ran Kali, it actually ran an Nmap scan. Nmap is a network tool that's used to basically scan, port scan, vulnerability scan, do brute forcing, all kinds of cool stuff. But because of that, it actually generates traffic that a lot of sensors can pick up and identify as potential bad stuff, which is why this says Nmap OS detection probe. What it was really doing is the scanner on Kali was trying to figure out what the operating system of the tool it's attacking, the system it's attacking. If it can figure out if it's Windows XP, it knows to exploit it as Windows XP and not try to attack it like it's a Windows server, for an example. So another thing to look at here real quick, because we're running out of time, I'm going to kick over to Kibana and look at what we can see here. This is another way that I like to look at data on the network. Again, keeping in mind, this is a lab environment. If I was running this in the enterprise, I would have hundreds of thousands more, if not millions of packets to look at. You have a couple different options. I can look at the alerts. I can look at files that were carved out of this communication. As an example, I ran Windows updates, so you guarantee there's a bunch of files that were downloaded. I can look at host traffic if I had any. Right now, I'm not pulling any just because I don't have that piece added. But if I look at the network, I can see those fields I was showing you, that table I showed you earlier, FTP, HTTP, stuff like that. And you can all see the different IPs, the source and destination, the amount of traffic that was generated, the ports that they were communicating on. And then again, if you click on this ID over here, you can actually pivot out to a packet capture and do a bunch of other stuff. But just to give you an example of what you can do with this, if I go to HTTP as an example, HTTP, as you might know, it is port 80. It is not encrypted. It's not port 443. A lot of stuff can run over a different port and still be HTTP protocol. It's the typical protocol used for HTML for your browser to go out and go searching. A lot of stuff is still encrypted nowadays. A majority of it's pushing more towards encryption, but there's still stuff that goes out over port 80. Surprisingly, Microsoft Windows Updates uses port 80 a lot. So you'll actually see this Microsoft Delivery Optimization come up as a user agent that was actually detected pulling traffic from the internet over port 80. Now, as you're probably gathering right now, this is somewhat complex. If you're familiar with how to use intrusion detection systems, network analysis tools, awesome. You'll feel right at home doing this. If this is all new to you, don't fret. This is a free tool for you to play with. If you run it on your network, it's going to collect a lot of traffic for you to do some analysis on. I'm going to kick back to the slides real quick just so I can finish this talk up. But what I'm going to tell you is that there are resources out there to help you get this knowledge so you can move forward. Once you get everything up and running, the false positive stuff I told you about, like all the alerts that are triggering that we don't understand, we need to tune that. We can grab Windows logs from our computers and shove them in, or MacBook logs or Linux logs, whatever you're using. We can do a bunch of different stuff. So other uses. This tool has got a lot of interesting uses. We can use this for training of malware analysis. So for example, if you want to be a malware analyst, you can actually take packets and play them back. Think of it like a VCR tape, a videotape, where I can actually get a packet capture from some bad thing that happened on the internet. There's a website called malwaretrafficanalysis.net. They actually have captured over the last 7-8 years all these different blog posts of packet captures of all kinds of malware. So for example, if I wanted to look at TA551, this ShackTac, this is a bizarre loader, which is tied to ransomware malware. Not only do they actually give you tips on how to do the analysis, they give you the actual packet capture. Just be aware that you have malware in this file. If you execute it on a system that is connected to your network, you could infect yourself. But in a lot of cases, it actually has an exercise, like a step-by-step guide on how to do it. You can do this in Wireshark. You can also play these back into Security Onion. That's the most awesome part of this, is I can literally take packets that I recorded or somebody else recorded, and I can analyze them using that tool, which is awesome. Let's see what else. We can also, like I said, do standalone incident response. I can basically load this on a laptop. I go into a building and say, you've been hacked. Cool. Give me all your packet information if you have it. Give me your Windows logs if you have them, your event logs, your syslog. I'll bring them back to my laptop, ingest them. I can process them and figure out a timeline. Brad Duncan, who's an ISC handler for the SANS Internet Storm Center, actually does a walkthrough on how he does this to do analysis. Justin Henderson, my mentor and friend over at SANS for the course that I teach, actually does a video of building a detection lab using similar technologies. You can definitely check that out. And the purple teaming framework, which is basically teaching people how to do red teaming and blue team teaming together, so you can learn from your attackers how to defend. Got a bunch of links of interest in here for you to check out and take a look at. Obviously, when you get a hold of the slide deck, you'll get a chance to play with these. A lot of great people out there in the community. They're doing a lot of great stuff. A lot of books have been written. Chris Sanders wrote a great book on network security monitoring. I actually used that course book to teach the network security monitoring course. He was gracious enough to allow us to do that. So thank you for that, Chris. These are great folks to follow on Twitter if you're looking for additional information in these techniques in these areas. If you want your brain to explode, follow these people. I guarantee you will be busy. Just as a quick last note, I do teach the YTAC 2122 network security monitoring course, which is basically doing what we just talked about, except at the enterprise level in much more detail. It's a 52-hour course, so it takes, I don't know, about 13, 14 weeks. But we try to dive into this in a much deeper level. So that being said, I tried to cram it in as fast as I could, Owen.
Yep. No, great job, Scott. There is one question from Janesh. If in an office environment, the computers are utilizing, say, Windows 10, with the new Windows 11 update coming soon, are they able to upgrade for better security and more features? Or will they have to change things in the background to compensate?
Great question. Don't know the answer because I have not rolled Windows 11 myself personally. I know folks are trying to do it. Friends of my community are playing with it. I would say for the most part, the information that I've got at this time is that Windows 11 for the most part is not that massive of a change from Windows 10, especially from a network security perspective, which is sort of unfortunate. There are folks that are definitely were hoping things were going to improve. And when I say improve, what I'm really saying is a lot of the stuff that was left over to be backward compatible to older networks and software, older technologies, we wanted to see a lot of that stuff go away. So there wasn't a possibility for anybody to enable features that should not be enabled anymore by default, be accessible. So the bottom line is I don't have a good answer for that because I'm not the Windows desktop guy, but I'm sure somebody can probably help you out if they're listening here.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you, Scott, for an excellent presentation. Well, a lot of information for us to digest. And
yeah, thank you.
The presentation will be uploaded. It has been recorded and will be uploaded to our website. And oh, here's another one from Rhonda. Oh my goodness. Yeah, Rhonda asks, first time I've ever heard of security onion. Will this slow down the speed of my network connection?
So Rhonda, for real quick, for the most part, it should not impact your speed of your network connection. What could impact your speed is the device you put in the middle. So that switch I showed you that would tap in between. If we're talking about this on a home network, obviously the cheaper the device, chances are it might be a little slow. I personally not noticed it. I have a gigabit Fios internet connection, and for the most part, I've never noticed an efficiency issue. But it's always possible. In the enterprise, I have not run into that happening too much because you got to keep in mind, Security Onion is not running in line. Like a lot of intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, if they detect a threat and an attack, they'll block it. This is off on a different leg of the network. So your switch is possibly spanning or mirroring packets, but it's not necessarily being impacted by that. Unless the load is so high that the switch can't tolerate it, then yes, it may. But I've not seen a lot of that happening. And I'm glad to hear that somebody never said they've heard of it, because you'd be surprised how many people that I know do not know about Security Onion. And it's a shame because, man, is it awesome.